Well, but that'll get them in. You got to have the right tagline for the magnet, and then you can also not be limited by it.
Yes. It can be anything. Okay, so good morning, everyone, far and near, international, and so on. Today we're going to have a free-form discussion, and Jordan only barely knows what I'm talking about, or I'm going to talk about, but I'm sure that he's going to contribute.
We will sight read the track and not slam into the wall. But please do use the whole gearbox.
Okay, so about 2 weeks ago yesterday, and 2 weeks ago today, as most of you know, we were in a conference. Some of us were in a conference in California. And that conference then was a movable feast, and we moved over to Helena, Montana. And the purpose of the meeting was to figure out what we're going to do at our confluence, the Creators Art, a confluence of art, psychology, and renewal. And I had fought the idea of renewal. I wanted religion instead, a confluence of art, psychology, and religion. But I realized that religion is, good morning, Artie, welcome. I realized that religion is the third rail of American politics and sort of American life, and maybe life around the world, because all our religions are fighting one another. And so I'm going to tell you why renewal is the right word. And so, first of all, I'll just remind you, for those who don't recall, this is the group that got together 2 weeks ago. And so it's me on the left here, and then Sherry Loveller and John Jackson, who live in Northern California. Sherry is a poet. John Jackson is a biblical scholar and a retired psychiatrist. Colleen Kibert, we were at her house. This is Colleen's house where we are. And she is a sculptor. And so she has done sculptures like this. This is a new take on justice. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. Then Robert Mannis, who is a psychotherapist in Frederick, Maryland, and Tim Holmes, who you've heard me mention many times. And so we were literally together for 3.5 days during this planning conference. And we all came away from it extremely jazzed. And so we were trying to figure out, how are we going to describe this? We need a website so that people will know what it is we're talking about. And we have several members of our advanced reading group who wanted to figure it out. And I don't think Jordan understands what it's about yet. And so Jordan, first of all, this would be a stump the stars question. I know you want to come to the confluence, but why? What's it about? What is it? What are we going to do there?
To me, this is the kind of experience that's the high octane fuel that drives my always complete, never finished, lifelong.
Okay, that's vague enough. Go ahead.
And that's vague enough. But with that high octane fuel, you turn the car on when you connect with other people who are not so much like-minded, but all roads lead to Rome. We're all approaching the unconscious. We all have a dignity and difference in our voices. There's such a respectful connection. We all listen. We all contribute. And I find that even if it's just 2 people or 3 people, but when it's 5 or more, that kind of community is one of the most necessary beauties for health there is.
Right. But why? Why does it create renewal?
Health. Because to me, if there is life, you have the cyclical death and the spaces in between. But if something is living, it is inherently renewing all the time, sometimes milestones in the moment, at larger scales. But to me, if something is alive, it's inherently in a state of renewal. Otherwise, it is logos,
Dead.
matter, dead. Yeah.
Logos. Okay.
Since Nick isn't here, we can,
Yeah. Well, fair enough. I've been sort of trying to figure this out for months. And what happened in this weekend was we all came away from the weekend feeling renewed. And so over the last 2 weeks, we've been struggling back and forth about how to describe it. And so we finally, it seems we have a consensus until somebody tells me we don't have a consensus, which is basically this, and I'll just read it to you because you won't know what I'm talking about. But
and before you read, I will add one more thing to my why. The old Turkish proverb, "A heart in love with beauty never grows old," and that's, as an aesthete and just someone who's interested in art and the psyche. It's not so much about not growing old, but the heart in love with beauty. And this confluence is a thing of beauty that's being created and made.
Righto. Okay. So we're circling the center here. And so let me just read the description that we finally came up with, which is provisional, but nonetheless, I think it's close to where we're going here. We're going to have a website probably soon. Okay, the Creators Art Confluence is the brainstorm of 6 dedicated teachers and artists who discovered a unique vision for renewal and are developing the insight to bring it to you. We know you can help us find many more facets to our discovery, and we look forward to including you in our process. And so, that says that it is a process and it is about renewal. Now, why? I came up with, what came back into my hand was this book, which is called Liberating the Heart by Lawrence Yaffe. And hi, Kathy. Yes, I'm trying to tell you that now. Okay, so Liberating the Heart by Lawrence Yaffe. And so what is that about? Well, it's about getting us out of the logos and into the eros, fundamentally. And so Yaffe describes it. Keep in mind, Yaffe was a Jewish man who also had the distinction of being the son of Aniela Yaffe, who was the scribe for Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which is Dr. Jung's memoir. And so once removed from that process, he probably got an earful during his early life about what Jung was about, from his mother. And so I'm turning to a page 119 of this book. And actually, I think I have it. I have a scan of this page, so I'm just going to pull it up because it'll help to understand. And you should leave us, it says Jewishness and Individuation is the title of his section, but I want you to ignore the word Jewishness because it's really about all of us and about who we are and what we are. So let me see if I can find what I have here. Yeah, here it is. I'm gonna bring up these 2 pages of Dr. Yaffe's book and turn it on its side. Let's view this, rotate view clockwise. Okay. All right. So pulling up the 2 pages that are relevant here so that everybody can read along and look at it later. So he calls this individuation in the Holy Spirit of Pentecost. And he says in Acts we read, and we're talking about Acts 1:4 here. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly a sound came from heaven like the rush of a mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues of fire, distributed and resting on each one of them, and they were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance, unquote. The scriptural narrative goes on to describe how a crowd of many whom were foreigners quickly gathered, and how each listener, what's my problem here? Trying to adjust this. Okay. Each listener was the wonder of it, heard the apostle speaking in his or her own tongue. Now, this is the kicker. The story of the Pentecost is what he's talking about. Reminded me of an experience recounted by Gerhard Adler, how upon departing from a lecture of Jung's, he shared with friends his astonishment that in his talk, Jung seemed to be addressing Adler's precise concerns. To Adler's surprise, both his friends took exception, each claiming that their own personal, quite different preoccupations were what Jung had been addressing. I have heard and read similar accounts from other patients of Jung's in which he seemed to be speaking to the very essence of their concerns which they had not yet revealed to him. For instance, there are accounts of patients coming in to their session prepared to discuss an important dream, but treated instead to an hour-long monologue from Jung. The amazing thing was that Jung's words seemed to be to the highest degree relevant to their dream, and they departed feeling that no direct interpretation could have achieved more for their understanding of it. This seems to be what happens in the company of one who is speaking from the self. That is, out of a connection with God or out of his or her wholeness, keeping in mind that we're talking about wholeness and the God image in each one of us.
What's interesting about that is, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, what's interesting about that is, for example, in some tarot sessions, I enter into more of a shamanic reading that
Yep.
if you had no people around and it's out of context, oh, that's nice, might sound a little vague, but the resonance that occurs with the client, like that, the dream, they're going to talk about a dream, something specific. This goes what initially seems vague, but someone's speaking from the capital S self, connected to the larger, to God. It's the most interesting thing. And I love that example there with Adler and his colleagues, that they each received a specific addressing of their concerns. And that meant Jung was speaking from the self connected to God, which is a shamanic mode. And what's interesting is with his scientific background, it was so clear and specific that the message is even, I think, fine-tuned to FM stereo kind of thing.
Yeah. So what's happening here? Because it happened to all of us when we were in California, is that it's irrational. We're opening up an irrational side of the psyche. And honestly, this is what traditional religions, all of them, have always done. Mm-hmm. What you do is you go to church or synagogue or the mosque, and if you do that once a week, you're going to get what you need if you give it a chance. I mean, if you go in saying, oh, this is baloney, and all these church fathers didn't know what they were talking about, and the scientific, we know everything now, so we don't need this. Well, you're missing the point, because it's not about that. Not at all. It's about how do you open yourself to the mystery of your life, and so one of the things that happens, and I knew you were going to go to Tarot, and I was going to as well, because Tarot does exactly the same thing. In other words, you go to a Tarot reading, and as long as you're not sitting there with your arms crossed like this, this is a bunch of baloney, and I don't think it's going to work for me. If you go with that attitude, then you're a Logos kind of guy, and you're not going to get anything out of it.
And that's one of the most interesting kind of clients, the completely defensive, completely skeptical. And I always just put both hands on the table and lean way into the table and say, so why'd you sit?
Yeah.
and immediately the arms open. Well, and that breaks that Hoover Dam, and it gets more to all right, I'm interested. It's okay. And it's almost like someone needed to tell them this is okay, and we're not at the carnival. This is no carny act, and it's okay for them to be them, and that's not a clown act either.
Yeah, right. And so basically you're doing the same thing. You're opening up the unconscious, and that's true of all methods of divination. If you listen to a divination and do it without this kind of stuff, then it's excuse me, it's going to open you up to all kinds of things that you hadn't anticipated. And there's a funny little passage in this book early on, and I regret to tell everybody that this book is out of print, and so, but for one thing, I did read it. I'm sorry, I did read the book entirely into the YouTube channel. And so if you go find the YouTube channel, you will be able to understand what I'm talking about. But and you will hear my melodious voice reading the entire book. cover to cover.
Nice.
But anyway, so there's a funny little passage about how Freud, who was a complete rationalist and scientific method style rationalist
And reductionist. Yeah.
and reductionist, talked about the superego. And
The ego that has a cape.
right. And what Jung says is what he was doing was smuggling Yahweh into his psychological approach.
I love that statement.
Yeah, and so the superego is Yahweh in the Old Testament. But anyway,
I can hear Don Henley with Smuggler's Blues singing about Freud. It's like,
yeah. So the point is, why did Jung spend so much time referring to religion when he was a psychologist and a psychiatrist? And the answer is he believed that he should talk about things by the names that they have always been given. In other words, rather than confuse things by introducing a new name and smuggling it into the conversation like that, which is definitely a form of speaking in tongues, I guess. But but in any case, he just used the terms that people were familiar with, and that relates then to why the Bible and all other scripture in the world, and I include in that things like the Bhagavad Gita, which I've read cover to cover in this YouTube channel. In fact, I read it 3 times, all at the same time in different translations.
right, and languages.
Yeah. Oh, yes, and in Sanskrit it was read at the same time. But they basically are doing this. They renew us because they open up the unconscious so that we can heal ourselves. Okay. And so if you go to church, you can be psychically healed, or the synagogue or the mosque, you can be psychically healed because you can open your logos-oriented attitude and receive the solution for yourself. And so circling back to what the confluence then is doing, is that each thing that we are doing is opening someone's mind to something that is not rational. It's not about rationality. It's about art, and how art and psychology work together. But it will change you. And
definitely. And I have to say that I'm always asked, how does tarot work? And as I'm writing my book, The Architecture of Well-Being, to get that system in play, it's not just how tarot works. As you've said, what's the purpose of art? People say, well, you can't get a job, you can't make money. That's not the point. The purpose of art, as you said, is to activate the psyche. And that's so apt. And it's really in alignment with my almost pat response. And I hope it doesn't start to sound like it's coming out of a can, but doesn't change much. But tarot works just the way art works, the way imagination works, the way creativity works. It's the visual language where reasons are unreasonable. And in that, the visual images strike chords to resonate in the unconscious and the imagination, which ring the dinner bell down the well of the unconscious from the creative wellspring to well up more psychic contents to enhance, and like you guys were energized after the confluence session. That unconscious welled up to fill up the high octane fuel tanks again.
Yeah, and you know, and we realized that you know, we're that the confluence actually began when Tim and I got together last May, because
Right.
it you know, he and I started to spark off one another in terms of this renewal. And you know, that same day we included Colleen, and holy smokes, you know, and she said to me, you know, I would have been quite offended if you hadn't included me in this. She said that last May the 9th. And so, you know, but we've been having trouble getting our minds around what it is, how does it connect? And so the point is, religion, one of the definitions of religion is referring back to understand how these things got to where they got. And
literally the ray leja.
Yeah. And
or leger.
And so you know, as we were looking at that image of the six of us, there is one, a series of Colleen's work here, which is her Justice series. There are actually 5 pieces of it.
You know, Skip, with you guys sparking, you and Tim sparking off each other and creating the confluence, I'm reminded of the old gardener's adage of first year roots, second year foliage, third year flowers and fruit, fourth year and beyond naturalization, if taken care of. And it's as if instead of years, you and Tim sparked the seed to germinate and adjusted the walking paths so as not to trample the new sprout. Colleen comes in and now we have foliage, and then fruits and flowers are already beginning to, you know, it's as if each time you guys meet, another year passes in the season of a garden or in the life cycle of a garden. And then coming to this June, there we go. It's going to be, okay, Monet Giverny, you know, the Tuileries flower garden. Right.
And so I just want to point to this series of sculptures of Colleen's, because it sort of relates to the point, and I want to find a better picture of that so I can show it to you better. But her, she came up with a new take on justice and what justice is. And I guess this is probably the best one I have here, although, okay, so the point about this is she wanted to do a piece or a series of pieces about justice. And of course, the traditional image of justice is, you know, the goddess of justice blindfolded with a sword in one hand and a scale in the other, right? That's justice. And Colleen was not feeling that was really justice for her. And I think there might be a better one here. I guess this is probably the best one, at least to make her point. Okay, so this was an evolving series of sculptures. She was looking deep within to understand what justice is. And of course, as lawyers, we're taught that it is, it's all in these books, and, the judge just goes by what's in the books and everything's hunky-dory. But that isn't the way it works at all. And it was one of the things that really infuriated me when I was trying to practice law for 5 years, which was that nobody was actually going by the law, if you will, or 90% of the lawyers were doing things that were not actually by the law, and I couldn't get a grip on that.
Well, like it's a legal system and not a justice system concept.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. And so the point is that you have to refer back to, some things that were in the past to say, okay, how did we get here? And so what Colleen was feeling out of her artistic sensibility is something different. And obviously here she's got the reference to the blindfold. And what she came up with, it's very hard to see in this picture, it's in some of the others. What she came up with was a feather, like this one is holding a feather. Mm-hmm. But sort of the key elements are the feather and the snake. And what happens is if you have a snake on its back and you step on its belly, you disable it. And the snake represents evil. And I'll just look and see if there's a better example of picture what I'm talking about. But
well, the textures of the flesh in that series feel to be being created and destroyed at the same time, in the same moment. They're coming into being, and it's interesting. You asked about renewal, and you asked about, and I responded with, if we're alive, we're in constant state of renewal. That life in the flesh of those sculptures is a visual metaphor of that renewal, of both and, rather than an either or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought I had a better picture of this one, but anyway, the point that she came up with is it's not truth that is necessary, because evil lawyers and judges can come up with some excuse for something that's not justice, and you're infuriated by it, but it's truth.
Or they have an injunction. They find a way that they can't get around it, so they find a way just to stop it.
Right, but the feather is about, in the end, what the truth is, whether or not the system that we've put around it. Here, I think I've got one. This is better.
And the feather's interesting because the feather has come off a flying creature, a bird. That which was in flight is now on the scale to be weighed. And so it's in a sense weighing numinosity. It's weighing flight.
Yeah. Okay, so here is Colleen with one of her pieces. And here you can see the feather much more clearly. And this is in bronze. And here she's got the foot on the snake and an apple there. The apple of knowledge. Okay, so what was the apple? The apple was the knowledge of good and evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Came from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so what Colleen's series here represents is not justice in the sense of, we're just going to blindly give you exactly what we have on our laws, because judges don't do that. From my own experience, I know that. We're going to give you something that works for society, okay? Because if I, in my lawsuit with the banks, I gave them 4,000 pages of truth, which is on the record in the courts of Maryland. But the courts, by the way, have sealed my case so that nobody else can see what I said. and I know what I said was truth, but if my truth came through, it would cause problems in every courthouse in the United States, because it's not, because the problem is that they can't admit how corrupt the entire system is from top to bottom in mortgages. just for very simple, for instance, the court allowed the plaintiff to change the name of the plaintiff and the identity of the plaintiff 4 different times in my lawsuit. And because they wanted a certain outcome. And I kept saying, well, no, this isn't the person or the firm I borrowed money for my house from. This isn't it. You don't. And so they would simply allow the plaintiff to change the name of the plaintiff,
that nomenclature change too, to me, just reminds me of kind of the definition of insurance. It's like paying money that you never really paid because you're going to sue your casualty company for the money. I mean, I remember being on a juror on a insurance trial that was 2.5 weeks long, and you had a plaintiff, you had a defendant, and you had a co-plaintiff, co-defendant that was the same person. So what you had was, this was not the person. There was a case involved that had a person, but she wasn't rewarded. But the plaintiff was suing the defendant for their money, and the casualty company was suing the plaintiff for suing their defendant for conflict of interest. But at the same time, they were suing the defendant to get their money, because insurance, if I'm paid, say, $20,000 on a claim, and the insurance company then pays me, they turn around and they sue their casualty company, who they have insured themselves with, to pay them 20 grand. Except the problem is that they paid me 20 grand and they probably owed me 24. And that 4 is profit. And now they get 20 back. So they never paid me anything except, from their pocket. They're out no dollars. They're up 4 grand. Their casualty company, et cetera, sues their insured. And that name change sounds just kind of like that kind of process and direct play of the bank insured by the bank, insured by FDIC, insured by et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, and the whole point was partially that the banks were paid twice on all defaulted mortgages.
Right.
They were paid once by the federal government bailing them out in the TARP, which was $445 billion, I believe, that President Bush and Henry Paulson just handed the banks. Who do you know that will give you $1 billion, right? Just off the bat. And one of the scenes in the crash was that 9 top investment bankers came into a room, and Henry Paulson came in with 9 sheets of paper, and they lent each of those the Treasury, he was the Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of the Treasury lent each bank $25 billion on one sheet of paper each. Okay, I promised to pay the U.S. Treasury $25 billion and just handed it to him. And oh, by the way, I don't know if that was ever repaid. I'm very doubtful that it was.
Well, and when the banks also have been paid twice, then they still have the holding of the property. And if they then put that particular holding on the shadow market, meaning it just disappears from being for sale, it drives the supply down, which drives the price up. And they have the leveraged debt, invisible equity, but it's on their books as a buying power for more loans and debt from the shadow market, while then profiting more on the allegedly fewer houses that are not in the shadow market.
Right. So it basically, we're not going to get into investment banking here, but because that's a deep morass. But fundamentally, 10 million homes were foreclosed, and the amount of that debt was doubled in the banks. And so the reason we have so many more billionaires and even today trillionaires, can you imagine a trillionaire is
1,000 billion.
Yeah, 1,000. Yeah, and 1 million. Okay, yeah. It's a million. Okay, so if you're a trillionaire, which apparently Elon Musk and Bezos are today, they have $1 million each. Now, that's all little green electrons in somebody's bank computer, but still. Now, Kathy Kerr raises a very nice comment here. She says, snakes suffer a bad representation in much art and history. I'm not sure. I find them mysterious, and I think we fear them, but we don't know them. And I agree that that's quite right, Kathy, and that's why in the caduceus, which is the symbol of medicine, there are actually two snakes, and one snake is good, and so knowledge of good and evil here again. One snake is good and is finding the solutions to our medical problems, like and so here we're metaphorically talking about a process, the process of finding the vaccines for COVID as an example. So
yeah, and then that's the other snake, where then poison in small doses is medicine.
Yeah. So,
I have a question back to real estate and that whole situation, and in the context of the concept of renewal. Yeah. I don't like any of that much. I remember seeing it before it happened. I mean, right before my firm took a huge hit, I noticed every third and fourth home in a particular neighborhood was for sale. And then all of a sudden it was dark and not for sale. And it struck me as odd. But in the concept of renewal, is all of that graft and call it death necessary for the system, or is it something that we could weed out of the garden and still keep a healthy system? Wouldn't it make the system healthier to not have that?
Well, it would, but it's a huge lift. Okay, it's a huge lift. Okay, because it's so deep, and we do have to get back to the topic in general, but at some point we might have a conversation about how those things can happen. But Wizard lately says great to bump into your public chat about the complexities of U.S. law, but any chance you can return to the analysis of Jung and the Red Book? And the answer to that is we have on this YouTube channel recorded, we have we have discussed the Red Book ad infinitum, and it is all on this YouTube channel. Indeed, many people have not read the book, including Jungian analysts, believe it or not.
I think
but nobody can doubt that I've read the Red Book because I read it for video.
Yeah, completely. I think I really am resonating with Kathy's statement about the serpent. People like it gets a bad rap. Yes, I fully agree. It shouldn't. I mean, even in the Garden of Eden, the serpent is Lilith. So you get the sacred feminine that gets then demonized, which is unfortunate. But to get back to renewal, it's interesting with Kathy's comment about the snake and not being so understood and being feared. The snake is like a crab. It lives equally between two worlds, the underworld and its hole in its cave. It comes out of here to the light. And in between those two worlds, it doesn't need to, say, live on the ground like we do. We go in rather than going under. And so I just really I really resonate with Kathy's statement to kind of segue us back into renewal, because the snake going down into the ground, into the dark underworld unconscious, coming back up with the new contents and all the fresh, pretty colors when it sheds its skin, and then back and forth and back and forth. And that Kathy bringing up that snake, the serpent, is a wonderful topic for just the concept of renewal.
I think that we have to make a distinction here between nature, the animal world, and as she rightly says, snakes aren't an evil bunch. Wicked is as wicked does, and so snakes per se are part of nature, right? And what we're talking about here is not nature and actual snakes in the world per se, because they do lots of things, and even poisonous snakes probably eat rats and things like that we would prefer not to be in the world. Also, and rats themselves aren't evil, because the plague came in through fleas on rats, not rats themselves. Rats are just nature again, but we're talking about a metaphor here, which is pointing to something else, and that's the point. Let's go back to the metaphor of talking in tongues, and why anytime anyone talked to Dr. Jung, even if he didn't talk about their problem, they still felt their problem had been addressed. And the point is that we have an irrational side. We live in the eros. We do not live in the logos, and unfortunately, we get ourselves so tied up in the logos that we forget that eros actually exists. And this is, the big mistake of keeping women down, for example, over millennia, is that women are closer to the natural world, and men who are attracted to the logos for various reasons don't want to address the natural world. But we actually live in the natural world, and we have to connect to that in our lives, or we don't have lives. And this goes back to my dictum, look around your room right now, look around your room. Everything that you can see in that room that's not a human being or a potted plant, every single thing is dead. There's not a single thing in there that's alive. And I include within that little black books like this one. Okay, that's just a black doorstop, unless a human being puts life into it, okay, then it's meaningful. And
I think
so, yeah,
back to the divine feminine. I mean, look at how, to me, the simplest sociological forensic to judge a culture is simply look at how they treat their women, period. And those that include, exalt, enhance, support, reinforce, and strengthen their women, as a rule, naturally, are healthier cultures. And the well-being of those cultures is healthier, is more robust and more living. And then you get more death in the ones that are basically avoiding and hiding from their problems. When you get they don't treat their women very well, they've got some serious psychological issues. I mean, you could just, and that's vague and off the cuff, but it's generally pretty on the mark.
Right. And
just how do they treat their women?
Right. And so here's a very interesting take that Lawrence Yaffe has. Okay. And I'm talking about liberating the heart. And we have to understand why this is significant. Obviously, the Abrahamic religions, particularly Christianity, and maybe to a lesser extent, Judaism and Islam, have lost their purchase. Christianity certainly has. And people, people don't understand what's missing, and it has to do with the scientific method dissing the natural world, the irrational world, for 500 years. And so now we say, well, everything has to be rational. Well, no, it doesn't, because we're not rational at all. And, we have our civilization thanks to rationality, yes, but the church is no longer the guiding principle. Okay, the Christianity per se is no longer the guiding principle. And what Dr. Jung says is the gods will not return to a place they left. And so unless you can get yourself back into Christianity and understand it and its beauty and so on, it's not going to speak to you at all. Okay. And so for me, I did get back into Christianity, not to go to church every week. I don't feel any need to be an organized religion, but at the same time, I understand Christianity, and it's very moving for me now because I understand it better. But here's a passage that's in the introduction to Yaffe's book that's very, very interesting. So listen to this. He says, since I will offer no logical sequential argument, it may be necessary at times to recall that we are proceeding round and round a central idea, which is that Western civilization is about to move under the rule of a new guiding principle, one that has been neglected in the past. Now listen to this paragraph. It's just, in a way, it's hilarious, but he really hits the nail on the head. He says, that new principle, okay, and many people are saying it's the feminine principle. Okay, but listen to what he says. The new principle has many names. Here in chapter 10, I call it the feminine principle. In other places, it is expressed as the psychological dispensation, chapters 1 and 11. God needs man, chapter 4. Man has a soul and there is a buried treasure in the field, chapter 9. The religion of experience, chapter 1. The reality of the psyche, chapter 2. Meaning, chapter 6. Or the validity of the inner subjective world, chapter 7. These different names for the new ruling principle reflect differing aspects of it. no one sentence, no one name is adequate to characterize what is a new manifestation of God, whom no one can describe. How about that?
Mm-hmm. And, at the larger scale of capital N nature, civilizations and cultures that amputate nature from their daily experience, those civilizations actually create uncivilized behavior, because the aggravation, and the body is naturally irritated if you don't have nature. And because it's severed, it's alone, it's isolated, and basically it experiences neglect from nature, which is one of the most serious psychological influences there is out there.
Yeah. And so there's been an exchange about snakes here, which I just want to say again, we're not talking about snakes, the animal. They didn't choose to be a snake when they were born, right? And, here's the thing. You can get all tied up on let's say from an emotional point of view, you could get yourself all tied up on the fact that hens lay eggs, which we eat. And of course, that happens in nature. I've seen birds that lay eggs, and then the raccoon comes and takes the egg and eats it, right? But we're doing nothing different. It's just that we sublimated at a grocery store. But you can think of it a different way, which is the children of the hen are sort of skipping the cue to consciousness by becoming human immediately, rather than having to go through being a chicken in this life. And so there are many ways to talk about these things, but if you go to a grocery store, everything that you buy there, everything that you are going to consume was once alive, every single thing. And so we've sublimated it to the
except
point.
the Velveeta. It was never alive, because they have to put food product. If you have to tell me it's food on the package, I'm kind of skeptical.
Well, but even Velveeta, couldn't consume it and digest it if it hadn't been alive at one point.
Right.
So, so let's look.
I just laughed. Food product. So you're telling me it's not really food; it's a food product. I don't think food needs adjectives.
So Dushan says, so Slavic and Celtic cultures should be the best ones if we go by how cultures treat their women. We all, I don't think that they're the only ones that treat their women well. Arabs certainly think they're treating their women well by leaving them alone. And so women in the Arab world have a different kind of life than women in the West, but in a way they have a lot of freedom too, because they don't have to spend so much time dealing with the men unless they're going to reproduce.
And that's also a masculine rationalization of they have freedom within the prison they've been placed in. I mean,
right, but we all have freedom within the prison we've been placed in too.
Right. Yeah. No, it applies across the board.
Right. And so, there's a famous cartoon of two women in abaya. That's a black curtain that women in the Arab world sometimes wear, and with the veil. They're walking down the strand next to a beach, and there's two Western women lying there in bikinis, And the Western women are saying, oh, those poor Arab women, they have to cover up all the time. And the two Arab women are saying, oh, the poor Western women, they have to be showing off their bodies all the time. And, it's just two ends of a spectrum. And, I think women in the Arab world appreciate the ability to cover themselves sometimes when they don't appreciate as Khushbu calls it, the unholy gaze of men, right? Which was why about halfway through reading the Bhagavad Gita, she started to refuse to show herself, because she said, I don't want the unholy gaze of people watching this. I'll read the book and the message, but I'm not going to show myself, because myself is for me. It's not for somebody I don't know who might be watching this video 20 years from now. So,
the Khushbu's action right there was in absolute integrity with what not only she was comfortable with, but what she felt in it was natural, which I think goes back to when Kelly said, snakes aren't an evil bunch. Wicked is as wicked does. And that doesn't mean snakes are wicked, but the wicked is as wicked does, and snakes aren't an evil bunch. Those are two completely separate statements that I find what's interesting. Wicked is as wicked does, your natural nature. I mean, the old story of the snake on a staff in a fire, and the man reaches into the fire and saves the snake, and the snake slithers away. And then a year later, he sees the same snake stuck on the top of a staff in a fire. He saves the snake. Before the snake slithers away, and it's a poisonous snake, it turns around and bites him in the hand. And he said, but I've saved you, snake. Well, why did you bite me? He said, I'm a snake. That's what we do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there are many parables like that, like the scorpion who bums a ride on a frog to cross a flooded river, right? And the scorpion gets out in the middle of the river and basically bites the frog and says the same thing. The frog says, why did you bite me? Now we're both going to die. And and the scorpion says, I can't stop my nature, right? And so
and that's, I think that goes into the lessons in the parables of temperance.
And
discernment.
Kathy makes a reference to a favorite quote of mine from Jung: too much nature makes a beast of man, and too much too much civilization wrecks nature. Fundamentally, we have to recognize that we are in fact creatures, animals, beings, but we live in civilization, but civilization has to support our needs, not destroy our needs, and or destroy nature, because in the end, if we destroy nature, then we destroy ourselves. And this is what the whole environmental global warming argument is about. Okay, there's a few people who will put more little green electrons in their bank's computer if they destroy nature, but the rest of us have to live out here.
Well, yeah, and I think that I love the quote. Too much civilization destroys nature. Too much nature makes a beast of man. At the same time, it reminds me of, I guess it's Croce in the 14th, Croce, Croce in the 14th century, when he famously said, if man were not similar, man could not discern man from beast. if man were not dissimilar, man could not discern man from man. And, these days substitute, the pronouns person and people instead of being just, male dominated there. But it's that's the a smaller scale turnabout of the nature and civilization quote from Jung, but on a grassroots level, that's applicable daily. The discernment, the temperance, but including nature and also including civilization together, balance.
So let me say good morning to Art Patterson, who's here, who's joined us. And so I want to refer back to the original premise of this discussion this morning, which is, we have quite a number of regulars that come and listen to us speak now, and what do we bring to the party which pastor doesn't bring, or today maybe, or what we aren't getting it from anywhere else in our society. And maybe it's the feather of truth. Okay, in other words, we have our skin in the game, in the sense that you're having to wake up at 7 a.m. in Taos to have this conversation with me.
More like 5:55, so I can do a little waking slowly instead of just turbo jumping to the screen.
Right. And so how does it serve us, and how does it serve our YouTube community? And it seems to me that the answer is the same that we find within the conversation. Two men who come with our wholeness. We're not here to make money. We're not here to, I'm not saving anybody, okay? And nor am I here to be saved. I'm simply offering myself, and Jordan is offering himself, to be as honest as we can in our conversation about various topics. And what that does is the same thing that Yaffe is talking about in Liberating the Heart, which is that we can all take from it what we need. And that is not predictable. I mean, if we go back 75 minutes to the beginning of this conversation, neither one of us could predict where it was going, and we don't care.
Well, it's kind of our Sunday morning road trip through the psyche and culture, and that tree's cool, turn left. It's like, why? That tree's cool, that's why. It's like reasons are unreasonable.
And so for reasons that are beyond understanding, we now do have a loyal audience that comes, for an irrational reason. They don't know why they're here. And, because I can't give anybody a reason other than it is a renewal, a kind of renewal, which is what we're talking about in our confluence too. I mean, what I can say about our confluence is that we're going to focus on things that we know, and it's going to be connecting to a 10,000 volt energy line. Okay, it's reestablishing psychic energy, so that you will go away feeling renewed. And
I think too that I like the 10,000 volt metaphor there, because also the key point to getting shocked is the amperage. And what's cool is the respectful way we all interact. The amps aren't that high, but you can get the big charge without getting shocked.
Yeah, and there are going to be various irrational. I mean, it's all going to be irrational. Okay, it's not rational. And we started with rational, and I made a schedule last July and filled in all the blanks in the schedule, and we literally have rebirthed our own vision of what it's going to be over this weekend we had in California together, and it's going to be very powerful. Let me give you some examples of things that are going to happen before it even begins. Okay, so on June the 10th, 2022, the official start of the confluence will be a kind of a cocktail party get together in Tim Holmes' studio. But for that whole day, beginning at dawn, and this will be an advantage to East Coast people, because when you go west, you tend to wake up early, so you'll be able to wake up early and be awake at dawn and easily. If you're from California, it might be a little harder. But the first thing that we're going to do is, as a group, we're going to go to a spring, which is at the Continental Divide. And we are going to take water from that spring, which is from both the west and the east, from the left and the right, from two sides of the duality, let's say. Okay, so we're going to take water from that spring, and we're going to bring it back. I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do with it during the confluence, but we're going to acquire that water at dawn on June the 10th, 2022, just as a group, just the six of us, and people who are attending the confluence will be able to join us if they wish, but they will be, but it's not a formal part of our weekend. It's a ritual part of our weekend, and it's certainly, in some ways, it's irrational, but we're going to take water from the west and from the east, and it will be combined water because it comes from that spring at the Continental Divide. Then we're going to go look at the dolmens. The dolmens are monolithic rock structures that were found only about 5 years ago in Montana. Montanans themselves didn't know they existed until about 5 years ago. And you can think of these rock structures as something like Stonehenge. Some of them are rock structures about, let's say the vertical columns are in some cases 45 feet high. And then they have a cross piece, very much like Stonehenge. And nobody knows how they got there. And so speculation on what nature did to create those, or was it aliens, or was it human activity? I think in the case of Stonehenge, we know that they are the result of human activity, of course, but the dolmens in Montana are not clearly the result of human activity. Let's just say that. And because we can tell that they have been there for thousands of years, we know that we know that it wasn't any modern human that did it. And even modern humans would have quite a task to try to create them, because they literally weigh many tons. And so then we're going to have an art exhibit in the afternoon of that day, just to get people into the mood, kind of thing. But in any case, we're going to do these irrational things even before the confluence begins, as a part of the ritual that begins the confluence. And so the point is, you take from it what you need, what you need from it. And so let me look at here. And Justin says, these are the exact questions I write about in a short story right now: the differences between animals and humans, and between humans and aliens. The only important factor seems to be the mind. And Nancy says, really enjoy the details of the confluence. Well, we hope you'll be able to join us, Nancy, next year. You're certainly on the invitation list.
I've been listening. Well, I made another cup of coffee. I just
right. Justin says, that's interesting. If the Native Americans also built dolmens, even if just small ones, like Dolny Glavanak Cromlech, I don't know what that is. Could that point at a common cultural origin? Very honestly, Justin, I think that these dolmens have been there for longer than than the time that human beings can reliably be said to be in the Americas. In other words, they're, anthropologists and archaeologists differ by tens of thousands of years, but the earliest number that I've heard is about 35,000 years ago. So we can't point to any time before 35,000 years ago that human beings lived in North America. And some say it's 13,000 years ago. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, so I can't say how long, but we know that it's between 13,000 and 35,000 years ago before we can point to anything that indicates human activity. And these dolmens have been in place for perhaps hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years. By comparison.
That brings up to me too that the contrast to the common cultural origin is the dignity of difference of the different characters, the lizard kind of characters, etc., that occur in South America and in tandem about the same time culturally in Africa and the Far East, but that they had no connection. Some people say, yes, there were boats, they crossed over, there's cross-pollination. But what's interesting is if there was not, then you have an allusion to the collective unconscious of these things arose out of the psyches of all these people simply because they all had psyches, connected to the collective unconscious. So there's common origin theory, and then there's also collective unconscious theory. And then in tandem with that, there could be civilizations multi-thousand, multi-hundred-thousand years prior to us that had higher technology and destroyed themselves. I mean, there's, all kinds of, what ifs, and I don't really sit on the fence on any of them. I just kind of read about them and go, possibly, but then each one can play a different tune in the fact structure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have the scientific method, and we know a lot about religion now, but the fact is, no matter how deeply you go, there's still a mystery. Okay, no matter how deep you go, and so the point is, and I wrote an essay, or I transcribed an interview between Dr. Yaffe, the same man, and Edward Edinger some years ago, which is very profound. And Yaffe asked Edinger, well, what about Jungian psychology has to do with religion? And Edinger thinks about it, and then he says twice, everything. I probably should grab that link while we're gamming about it here, but which I will do.
That innate mystery lives in its entirety in each and every interstice between two neurons, or each and every unincarnated has nothing in the place of connection. I mean, the space between things is that mystery also, the non-things that bring things into connection.
Yeah, precisely. And which is a point I concur with. It's not only in the DNA, it's actually in the smallest particle that you can find.
Things are in orbit around each other. I mean, you get down, and you get little solar systems. I mean, valence shells. It's.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't claim any wisdom about this essay, but I will put it out on the YouTube channel, and it's I called it Edward Edinger's summation of Jungian psychology, but it's really putting Jungian psychology in the context of religion, and I'm putting. Whoops. Let's see if I can get this link on, because it's a very long link. Okay. And I'm only allowed 200 characters. Okay, there it is. And I'll give it to Jordan too. So you just have to trust me and follow the link. And there's one other link that I wanted to bring to your attention, and that is a link to Dr. Donald Kalsched's talk to an audience at Pacifica Graduate School, and I'll put that on the YouTube channel, and it's about his book, Trauma and the Soul, and it's a very powerful talk, and does connect up a lot of these ideas, and so. Okay.
I'm just copying it into another.
To another conversation?
No, just into an email. Another window, so I can have the link. It started dragging my system. So I'm gonna copy the link. I don't know if my video disappears when I do this.
Yeah, we're not seeing you, but
yeah, there we go. Yeah, it was dragging the system. So I just copied the link into a dummy email so I can pull it up after.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to have to respond to a call of nature just now, so I'm going to turn it over to you for a couple of minutes here.
Sounds good. I'd like to go back to the speaking in tongues part, and in context with, I think Kathy's comment, about serpents and not an evil bunch, that, snakes shed their skin, and the skin is not missed. They evolve, and look at all the pretty colors, once they shed the old skin, and they don't, in a sense, hang on to things, honestly, like a lot of us can or have a tendency sometimes to do. But then switching that to the speaking in tongues part, I wonder, and I just wonder if the speaking in tongues is really either a awake dream talk, or an ecstasy that's being vocalized when we surrender to receive the unconscious in that way, because there always seems to be that divine characteristic of the experience, not necessarily religious. And there's also, I think, a context of just the vocalizations where reasons are unreasonable. Maybe they make sense, maybe they don't, but that each of our voices, when taken to that level of a primitive or primal, it's probably a better word, less negative, place, each of our voices is different. So I bring that back around to Kathy bringing up the serpent's tongue. It's forked, it's split, it has both that come into unity. And snakes, it's my understanding, they smell with their tongue. So they're, in a sense, they're tasting their world, much like, I guess, a butterfly does with its feet. And so there are all these different antenna, as it were, like the snake's tongue, that animals in nature and insects have. Makes me wonder what our antennas are, and are they internal? And so I think I'll kind of move to pause, and Skip's coming back. I began talking about the speaking in tongues. Is it a dream talk, an awake dream talk? Is it a vocalization of divine ecstasy?
Or is it just a fraud? That's the question.
Or is it just a fraud? Are all those people actors? And what I find, though, if you get into ecstatic dance and shamanic rituals, a similar thing happens often with the fire juggling cultures of people. I mean, you go to Burning Man, you go to other places, but it's interesting to me that then the gibberish or the vocalizations, they're not verbalizations, they're vocalizations, almost like pre-symbolic sound with an infant before they begin to speak, taking us on, in a sense, back to source. Is it a surrendering to ecstasy? Or, like I like to call it, I mean, we have clairaudience, clairvoyance. Is it just clairfraudulence?
Yeah, well, I would say, I think it depends. Okay, I think that there is no doubt that fundamentalist religion, which uses speaking in tongues and snakes and things, certainly open people up to renewal. Okay, the same as all religions seem to do that. But there is also nature there. Every so often, a snake charmer brings a rattlesnake into a fundamentalist service. Every so often, they get bitten, and and of course, if somebody's going to bring, excuse me, a 6-foot rattler into church service, that's going to put you in touch with your nature right away, because there are a lot of things that are going on in your psyche when you see somebody walking around holding a writhing snake that is poisonous. That's going to open you up to the eros side of your life, to your nature. But by the same token, it is nature. And so sometimes it will bite the snake handler. And it isn't that the snake handler is wrong by his approach to renewal, because I'm sure those folks, when they leave their service, do feel renewed, and feel the spirit in themselves as they leave those services. But it's a somewhat extreme way of accomplishing that. So I just wanted to mention that Nancy Pfaff here is one person who passed through an incredible Christian individuation. And we talked about it in 5 interviews that we did over about 4 or 5 month period. And it's on this YouTube channel. So it's under a Christian individuation. And that too is an experience. So yeah. Okay, so Nancy says, my experience of speaking in tongues is closer to an artistic creative experience, yielding my vocalizations of spirit. Good, that's exactly what I'm trying to express here, and what I am seeing from what Dr. Yaffe said, that, the point is that if we come to something with our wholeness and it's authentic and we feel authentic about it, then it is going to provide a renewal to people. And it doesn't mean that everybody will get that renewal. In other words, you can have a total rationalist sitting there going, that doesn't mean anything to me, or that, that's baloney, but that's not true. And obviously many people do take renewal out of it. And what I think that we took out of our weekend together 2 weeks ago is that, artists do renew one another, and when they interact, and so we, it is renewal that we are offering. And so if and it's renewal that pastors offer every Sunday morning. But in the case of coming and listening to Jordan and me speak on a Sunday morning, it's like plugging into a 120 volt socket. But when you have a program that we have put together all in one place, which includes some pre-programmed things like going to the Continental Divide to get water, then you're going to find that that's plugging into something that's it's much more powerful. And I'm only seeing this in the fullness of time. So yeah, so the point I think that Kathy Kerr is making, or Carr, I think your name, it must be pronounced, but you can correct me perhaps. If it's Carr, you could write C-A-R. If not, then I'll take it as Kerr. But I've known people who pronounced it both ways. But the point is that all of these approaches actually work, and they connect us with something that is very deep, and it is about the heart, because as Jung said, we don't know anything without the subjective, which is our unconscious, which is within us, the psyche. And what all these things do is point to things that are within us. And what I had the most trouble dealing with was that the religious people that I was dealing with were always referring to God out here. And of course, the scientific method is going to challenge that, because we can now see back to the Big Bang, close to it, and we can see down to the smallest particle that we can find. And so where is God? But that's not the point, because it's because the place to look is in your own heart. And it took me, wow, decades to deprogram myself from the idea that God was outside. So, you know, all practices, that get you to the heart are work and are true. You don't have to, it's not a competition. So you can get there by Kundalini, or you can get there by going to church or mass on a Sunday, or you can get there by going to an art museum. And all of them point back to the psyche, and that's what we are having trouble understanding, and what I had lots of trouble understanding. But if you accept religion in that way, then you can say that, holy smokes, the Holy Bible is true, every word of it. And so is the Bhagavad Gita, and so is the Quran, and so are other sacred texts, because they all point to the same thing. And instead of having a competition about those things where it's my way or the highway, we can all point back to everything, back to those things, and saying, yes, I can now see why that can work, and why, if different people come to the same event, whether it's a meeting with C.G. Jung or a church service, or you know, even a circus, let's say, they can all go out of it renewed, and they don't have to put it in a civilized box per se. Yeah, and Kathy says, yes, Skip, I like to say there are many spokes that lead to the center of the wheel, or mandala. And yes, indeed. And human beings have realized for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, that the mandala is significant. And I just mention that again here, because many of you may have seen these images that I keep on my desktop. One of them is this one, and it's a mandala that's found on the ceiling of a cave in Kimberley, Australia. And this mandala is over 50,000 years old. And so human beings had it that far back. And then the other one that I like to point to is this one, which is the mandala of the pufferfish. And actually a ritual that the pufferfish uses to as a courting method. This is the male pufferfish in the top, creating this mandala, and the purpose of it is to attract the female pufferfish who comes to the center of this mandala and lays her eggs. And a friend of mine, Gray Yates, said that human beings separated from pufferfish 200 million years ago. So this idea of the center goes back way farther than we can say. And I think that's interesting. So anyway, I hear my wife wrestling around at her desk because she is involved in a Buddhist meeting today, and so I'm going to have to wrap this up. But so Kathy says puffers do sacred geometry, absolutely, and the significance. I mean, there are many significances, but the pufferfish in Japanese is called the fugu fish, and it's the fish that's a delicacy in sushi restaurants, but you have to have a very skilled and well-trained cook to serve puffer as part of sushi, because the pufferfish is poisonous to humans, and it will kill you very quickly if you get any of their venom. And so the sushi chefs who know how to find and remove the poison from the pufferfish, very specialized. And I actually did have it once and didn't know it at the time. And I certainly never had these connections to it until a few years ago. But anyway, as you hear, as usual, my voice is collapsing, as it often does after speaking in a monologue or a duologue for nearly 2 hours. So I'm going to call it quits. I'll give it a few more seconds on the YouTube chat, and then I'm going to terminate the discussion. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I seem to have lost Jordan for one reason or another, so we will move on. And Kathy, I hope I've put some structure to what we're talking about. And mind you, 6 of us have been trying to figure out what it is that we will be doing at our confluence. And we all knew it was important, but we didn't really put it together necessarily until this past week, precisely a way of saying it. So once more, I'll read the description that we have here, which is the Creators Art Confluence is the brainstorm of 6 dedicated teachers and artists who discovered a unique vision for renewal and are developing the insight to bring it to you. We know you can help us find more facets to our discovery, and we look forward to including you in our process. And actually, I've just done that. And so you are part of our process, and we're, it's not something that we think is particularly earth-shattering or unique, or, well, maybe it is earth-shattering because it's a different way to think about the world, I suppose. But we're going to demonstrate how to do it. And it's not that we have the exclusive or only way of how to do it, but we have a different way of thinking about it, I guess. And so I hope to see you, or some of you, in Helena next summer. As I mentioned last week, I think we're going to be limited to about 10 people from outside Helena, besides the organizers ourselves. So if you wish to be a part of it, you're going to have to let us know soon. And so I will put my email address on the YouTube chat. And if you have some interest in it at this point, please do give us let us know that you want to be invited. It will be, I'm estimating that the price of the confluence per se will be about $500, which will include some meals. And Kathy, thanks. So that's going to include some meals, and it will be a 4-day event beginning on the 10th of June and ending on the 14th, with some pre-confluence and post-confluence activities, including a visit to Yellowstone. So if you ever put on your bucket list to visit Yellowstone, this will be the time to do it, because the confluence team will be with you during that time, and that might be a very special period too. So I hope you can join us. Anyway, I hate to end these things, but time is tempus fugit. So have a good week. We will be on for our usual Monday session tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, tomorrow Monday. And we will not have a advanced reading group this week because of the Thanksgiving holiday and the expectation that many people will be traveling. And so tomorrow night will be the last session before Thanksgiving, and I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving if you live in the United States, where we have one holiday a year that we can all agree to, which is Thanksgiving, which is typically a family gathering, and it's important to many of us. And Justin, good news. Yeah, so the COVID restrictions are come again, go again. I have no idea how that's going to pan out. We do have several participants that we're bringing in from overseas, and we're hoping that they're not going to have difficulty coming, and you would be one of them if you wish to come. And so let's just see how it works. we just have to play it by ear. It's still more than half a year away. So we can all hope. Peace. Have a great day. Bye. Or have a great Thanksgiving holiday, and see you. Perhaps I think we're going to skip. I think Jordan and I are going to skip Thanksgiving weekend because everybody will be traveling. So we'll be doing